So today I am super excited because we have come to Manchester Airport Runway Park and we've got a tour booked on Concorde. Now I'm so excited because I haven't been on a Concorde since I worked for British Airways at London Heathrow, so I am really excited about this. We're parked pretty much by the runway, so you can probably hear the background noise of aircraft taking off, and brings back so many memories for me working at London Heathrow. So I am really excited. So we shall see you shortly. Oh, the leather seats, I remember these. So we've got some outside temperature -57°C, speed 1,354 miles an hour, and that side it tells us that they're flying at Mach 2.02 and at 56,500 feet.
Hello, good morning, welcome aboard Concorde. One of the things I normally say to people is when you're standing outside there, what do you think of it? And I must admit, when you look at it from the outside, it does look very big, doesn't it? Yeah? And then people come on board and they're quite surprised at how small Concorde actually is. Once you get inside. One of the reasons for that being is that basically, if it was big and fat, like the A380, there would be too much resistance on the front of the aircraft, isn't there? Yeah. So that would really, you wouldn't be able to get up to supersonic speeds, okay? And the other thing is, you'll find when you go down there, Tony will explain a little bit to you, because you're going through the air so fast, you're actually being cooked in Concorde, all right? Because the outside skin's at 100 degrees. This is why the air coming into the cabin here is at freezing point, to keep it nice and comfortable for you in here. Otherwise, we'd all get to New York looking like cooked chickens. Anyway, the Concorde you're sitting on is Golf Bravo Oscar Alpha Charlie. Now, those of you that know much about the history of aviation, that was British Overseas Airways Corporation, and that was the airline that was initially going to buy Concorde, okay? But in 1974, when they started building this Concorde that you're sitting on at the moment, that was when they decided to merge British Overseas Airways Corporation and British European Airways to form what we now know as British Airways, okay? And it's a bit like having a personalised number plate, this Concorde is here, GBOAC, all right, British Overseas. And this is why this was very often seen as the flagship of the British Airways Concorde fleet, all right? Now, this aircraft was built in 74. It was finished off in early 75 and it first flew in February 1975. But because the aircraft did not have its certificate of airworthiness, it could not be delivered to British Airways. So it was flown up to basically RAF Fairford to join the other Concordes to do flight testing. So this aircraft was used to make sure that the cabin environmental control system would deliver you to New York all healthy and fit and warm, yeah? And also it was used for checking the auto land systems and autopilot systems, and it was also used for route proving, yeah? Because with route proving you have to make sure that when you fly anywhere, that when you get there, that the airport can handle the aircraft when it gets there. Those of you who know anything about aeroplanes, most aircraft have in the back of them what's called an auxiliary power unit, and that is a little engine that is used to start up the aircraft. Rather like you have the batteries in a car, okay? Now, if you turn everything off on Concorde, there's no APU. So wherever Concorde went, they had to make sure there was a ground power supply there to help you to start the aircraft up again. Otherwise it would be stuck. And they were also looking at things like could they handle the passengers and this sort of thing. Because when the A380 first came into Manchester here, what they found was that Terminal 1 couldn't handle 660 passengers all in one go, okay? So basically that's one of the reasons why you have route proving, also to make sure that with timings and things like that, because what you don't want to do is you never want to arrive early or late at an airport, because if you do that you might find there's nowhere to park at the terminal and you've got to sit on the tarmac somewhere for a half an hour or an hour because you're either too late and there's nowhere to drop you off, or you're too early, things like that there.
Actually, yes, I have a question.
Well,
all the seats here, are they all just as comfortable and roomy?
these seats you're sitting in at the moment are not the original seats that were fitted in Concorde. During its lifetime, they've had 3 different types of seats put in. The seats you're sitting in were redesigned seats following the Paris air crash in July 2000, because what they found with doing the modifications to the tank, okay, putting the Kevlar liners in made the aircraft heavier, so they had to redesign the seats in here of a lighter material. So rather than using steel tubing, they've been using titanium. Okay, now you might think that the seats are nice and comfortable because basically the material that is covering the seats is real leather, and it's called Connolly ink blue leather, and they are exactly the same material that you will find lining a Bentley or a Rolls-Royce motor car. So you can see that British Airways and Air France are trying to portray this image of luxury travel. And the reason you might find these seats very comfortable is you think that following the Paris air crash, this aircraft was only put back into service more or less in December 2001, okay? And then it was only flying for another 18 months before it was taken out. So this is why the seats you're sitting in will more or less feel brand new. And one thing with Concorde was it was a very underutilised aircraft. In the 27 years that Concorde was in service, this aircraft you're sitting on has only done 22,600 hours of flying. An equivalent jumbo jet will have done something like 60 to 70,000 hours of flying. So you can see it was very, very underutilised. But while we're talking about the seats, each of these seats you're sitting in cost £7,000 each to build. Okay, so they're not cheap.
Is that adjusted for inflation?
What's that?
Is that adjusted for inflation?
For inflation? Yeah. No, that's what they paid at the time. In 2001 when they were put in, it was 7,000. I should imagine if you did it today you'd be looking at a cost of around about £10,000 each. Okay, so talking about the seats with Concorde, you might notice you've got a lot of leg room on it. Okay, now when they first built Concorde, they actually wanted to squeeze 140 seats into Concorde. Now if they'd have done that, it would have been like flying supersonic EasyJet. Yeah. Okay, you would have been sitting here with your knees under your chin. Yeah. All right. But when they come to get the certificate of airworthiness for this aircraft in December 75, the Civil Aviation Authority said no, the maximum number of seats that you can have on Concorde is 128 seats. Right. All right. But when they actually ordered the aircraft, British Airways and Air France only asked for 100 seats to be put in here to give you this 38-inch legroom, because they still wanted, with the seats, with the comfort, they wanted to portray this image of luxury travel on Concorde. Okay, and if you were lucky enough to travel on some of the Air France aircraft, they only put 92 seats on their aircraft there, so they would have a little bit more room. But sometimes it would vary with the size of Concorde. Not all the Concordes were the same size. This aircraft you're sitting on is the biggest of the 20 Concordes that were built, the biggest and the heaviest. Some of the other ones, if you've ever been to Yeovil and had a look at the Concorde down there, you'd think that's a dinky toy compared to this one. That is a prototype, and it is a lot smaller than this particular aircraft here. Okay, so basically this aircraft was then flying till April 2003 when they decided to stop flying Concorde again. There were a number of reasons before anybody asked me. One of them was the Paris air crash that really decimated the passengers travelling on Concorde. While Concorde was out of action, you also had the Twin Towers, didn't you? Yeah. After the Twin Towers, not just with Concorde, the market across the Atlantic was basically chopped down to about 20%. All right. So you couldn't really run this aircraft economically, or any airline going across the Atlantic. The other thing is, Airbus industry did no longer want to support the Concorde program. So if you had a problem like happened to this Concorde coming back from New York, where a big chunk of the rudder fell off, yeah, you can't go to Halfords in Heel Green here, can you, and say, have you got a spare rudder for a Concorde there? So this is really, there's a number of factors that contributed to Concorde basically stop flying. Okay, so that's why in April 2003, British Airways and Air France decided to no longer fly Concorde, because with Air France, one of their routes was from Paris to Rio de Janeiro, and what they found on some of those flights, they only had 6 passengers on board. Most airlines, you need at least 80% capacity to really cover the cost of flying the aircraft. Anything above that is profit. Because you were flying supersonic, there was a 95% markup in ticket prices. So if you were flying on this aircraft compared to a jumbo jet, you were paying twice the price. All right. Now, when Concorde first started flying with passengers on in 76, you would pay £439 for a one-way ticket from Heathrow to Washington. All right. Now, that was a time when I just finished my engineering apprentice, and I flew to Tenerife for £20 return. So you can see, even in the very early days, it was very, very expensive to fly on Concorde. Now, in the mid-90s, a guy called Colin Marshall took over as the chief executive of British Airways. And one of the things he discovered was the fact that Concorde was losing money. All right. So he bumped the prices up to something like about $4,800 for a return ticket from Heathrow to New York. And even though he did that, it didn't make one bit of difference to the number of people flying on Concorde. The reason being is, most of the passengers flying on Concorde had no ideas what they were paying for their tickets. The reason being, because a lot of them were rich and famous, or business people, it was their companies that were booking the tickets and paying the tickets for them. So they had no idea what they would pay for a ticket. Just to make you aware, a couple of times British Airways Concords did a round the world trip, not all in one go, but in stages, and the tickets on those flights were £50,000 each. Okay, and on every time they did it, the flights were oversubscribed. So in other words, they filled up the aircraft, and they also had people sitting back waiting to come on board Concorde in case they didn't fill it up there at all. Okay.
How long would a trip like that take, give or take, with knowing it's done in stages?
Well, now you're asking that. One of the things with Concorde is speed. Okay, Concorde goes at 1 mile every 2 seconds. The other aircraft you see at the airport today, they take 6 to 7 seconds to do the same 1 mile. Okay, so if you were going to New York, you know, on a really good day, it would most probably take you 3 hours and 20 minutes to get to New York. If you're on a jumbo jet, you're most probably looking at 6.5, maybe 7 hours, depending on the weather conditions. Because what can affect it is things like the jet stream. Yeah, you know, the jet stream goes around the top of the world like that. If you get the jet stream behind you coming back to New York, back from New York to Heathrow, which they did on one occasion, instead of taking 3 hours and 20 minutes, they did it in 2 hours and 59 minutes. And that was the time when they reckoned they were clocking 1,480 odd miles an hour coming back from New York. All right, so this is the problems you got there, because weather is going to affect you. And one of the other problems they had with Concorde is because of that speed. If it flew in the normal air lanes, it would always be catching up the other aircraft, because Concorde would normally fly at 56 to 60,000 feet. Now, with aviation, when you take off from Manchester going to New York, you just can't fly anywhere. you have to fly in what we call Category A airspace, which is basically a motorway in the sky. Now, if you were put into the normal air lanes going across the Atlantic, you would for everlasting be asking air traffic control, can you go up and can you go down? Yeah, which is not always possible. So this is why with Concorde, they always said you were flying between 56 and 60,000 feet. And there was 3 airways at that altitude designated to Concorde. One was for Concorde's flying to the States, one was for Concorde's coming back from the States, and one was in case there was a third Concorde in that area at the time there. Where you're sitting, yes?
Yep.
You're in trouble.
Oh,
Okay?
okay.
Because the reason for that being is if Her Majesty the Queen ever flies on Concorde, she is always given seat 1A, and you're in seat 1A. Okay? Her Majesty the Queen got on board now, you would be for the tower.
Off with his head. Off with his head.
And where you're sitting is the Duke of Edinburgh. Now the Duke of Edinburgh's worse than the Queen, so you've even worse trouble than he is for the Queen. Yeah. No, Her Majesty with Queen would always be given seat 1A, and Prince Philip always had 1D. The reason being is because they've got windows to look out on, all right, and they've got a bit of extra leg room, and also to give them somewhere to put their paperwork. Because if you've ever met Her Majesty the Queen, she always likes to do a bit of preparation work before she arrives anywhere, to know who's who and all about them. Okay. Other people other royals that flew on Concorde was the late Princess Diana, okay, and the Queen Mother. Now those that have been up to the cockpit so far, they totally tell you about the Queen Mother sitting in the training captain's seat. No. Apparently the Queen Mother would ask for a gin and tonic, then she would walk off down there and she would sit in the training captain's seat drinking her gin and tonic while talking to the flight deck crew there. Okay. Princess Margaret, the Queen's late sister, she also flew on Concorde, because every Sunday Concorde would do a flight down to the Caribbean, and Princess Margaret would be on that. Now, on one of those flights, the Mach meter in the front here did not get up to Mach 2. So somebody told Princess Margaret it was stuck. So apparently she came over here and wellied it with a handbag, apparently, to try and get it working again. All right? That's royalty, yeah? Now, there was a lot of other rich and famous people that used to like flying on Concorde, yeah? So, for example, those of you that know Joan Collins, the actress, yes, if she was on Concorde, she always liked to sit at the front of the aircraft and on the aisle and get on first. The reason for that being is because she knew everybody would be getting on the aircraft at the front here, they would pass her and recognise her.
Okay.
Yeah, Michael Jackson, the singer, the late singer. Now Michael always sat in 2D, yes? So at the end of the tour, madam, we'll expect you to do the moon dance down there. All right? Now, it's a funny thing. These famous people always would, if they could, preferred their seats. So Michael Jackson always went there. And the one thing with Michael Jackson is, if he was on a flight, he always bought 2 seats, because he didn't want anybody sitting next to him talking to him during the flight. He wanted peace and quiet during the flight there. Bill Clinton, the ex-US president, he loved flying on Concorde. He was on one of the last Concordes from Washington into Heathrow. Normally sits in the middle of this forward compartment. So where you're sitting there, you 2 youngsters there, you must really sit in Bill Clinton's seat, all right? So you might feel that power, you know, the most important man in the States be sitting there. David Frost would sit right at the back of Concorde, because he knew if there was any empty seats, he'd try and get somewhere with an empty seat next to him so he could start and prepare for his next show in the United Kingdom when he got back there. Yeah? Barbara Streisand. How many of you know Barbara Streisand, the actress? Yeah? She was heard on one flight that she was on that she understood where they got the idea of the pointed nose from on Concorde. Yeah? Because she's got a pointed nose, hasn't she? Yeah? And the same as somebody else had the Archbishop of Canterbury on board Concorde, and he just joked that when he flew on Concorde, this was the nearest he's ever been to God, because it's flying at 50,000 feet on there. Okay, so these are just a number of the things you got. Another one was, on one of the flights, they had the American Ryder Cup golf team going back to the States, and one of them sneaked on board a golf club and a golf ball. And he stood where I'm standing now, and he put a glass where the humidifier is by the toilets in the middle of the aircraft. And he took a putt.
Oh my god.
And that putt took 8 seconds. Now, when they got back to the States, the American team tried to claim this as the longest putt.
Yeah.
Because in that 8 seconds, Concorde had done 4 miles. Yeah. But needless to say, the Guinness Book of Records said, on your bike, we're not having that at all. No, when you were travelling on Concorde, it was always silver service. If you've ever flown with some of the other airlines at the airport here, if you have a meal on board Concorde, you'll very often find it's a congealed chicken curry in a foil container, in some Baker-like container. Yeah. If you have a drink, it's in a plastic glass. On Concorde, when you take off, one of the first things is you're given a glass of champagne. Okay. Once you've had that glass of champagne, they'll come round with a meal tray. Now, there won't be nothing on it apart from a knife and fork and this sort of thing. And it was proper china, not plastic or Bakelite. It was proper china. Okay. So basically, you know, you were getting that luxury feel on the aircraft. And what they would do, they would come round there and serve you your meal. Yeah. So it might be like fish and chips for you, sir. Yeah. Smoked salmon for madam. And that's what happened. And because so many business people flew on Concorde on a regular basis, they changed the menu every week, so you didn't get bored with the menu there. Okay. So that was the problem. I'll just give you some idea. One guy who flew on Concorde was a guy called Fred Finn, who was an oil industry executive. And in the 27 years that Concorde was flying, he flew on it 718 times.
Wow.
And in 1 year alone, he flew on Concorde 78 times.
Wow.
And he actually came here in April when we had the 50 years of Concorde celebrations, and he gave a little chat about his experiences on Concorde. He's something like 87 now.
Yeah.
But he came here and he gave us a little bit of a chat about what it was like flying on Concorde there. But that's what you get. You're given a proper glass on your tray, yeah, and the cabin crew will come round topping your glass up during the flight.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And again, so that you didn't get bored with the wines on the aircraft, the wine list was changed every month.
Right.
All right.
Right.
So that again, you would not get fed up of drinking the same wines all the time. One of the things with Concorde is to give it any substantial range, a lot of the spare space on Concorde is full of fuel. Yeah? So you've got fuel in both wings and in the belly of the aircraft and the back of the aircraft as well. And in fact, space for luggage for passengers is at a premium. All right? And it very often happened with Concorde that they could not get all the luggage on board and it would have to come on a later flight. Yeah? This is why with Concorde, because it went across the Atlantic 4 times in a day, whereas a jumbo jet would only go there and back, it was found that 1 in 5 of the passengers who flew out in the morning actually came back at night, and they wouldn't have a lot of luggage. Yeah? So for example, if you ended up with a people like Joan Collins, yes, and I believe it or not, there was a picture of her in the paper not so long ago. She's just been on a trip now, and it was showing her at Heathrow Airport, and she'd only go in for a few days, and she had 4 big suitcases. Now, if every passenger on Concorde did that, no way are you going to get all the luggage in Concorde. Because I always joke with people here, and I always say to them, because of the speed of Concorde, now, if you've been on holiday to Cyprus or Tenerife, it normally takes you 4.5 hours. Yeah. If you did the same holiday with Concorde, you do it in 1 hour and 10 minutes. Yeah. But you know how everybody is with their 20 odd kilogram suitcases, you wouldn't get them all on board Concorde. All right, that's one problem. And even the overhead luggage racks here, these are very, very small. They're not like on the very large aircraft today where you could put, you know, your 10 kilogram little suitcase in there. All you can get in here is a small briefcase and your coat.
Yeah.
All right, there is no extra space in there at all. So this is when you answers your question there. No, it would not carry freight. But well then, you've got a question?
Yes. It's a luggage question. Let's say you take a big company like the WWE or any big company like that.
Yeah.
They're coming. They're doing a tour. you have an entire roster of people. How is any type of company like that has so many people traveling? How are they going to get their luggage on board?
Well, if you booked on Concorde, they would try and get the luggage on board. It depends what a lot of the passengers have brought with them. Yeah.
Okay.
If you filled this up all with business people going to New York with a small overnight bag, yeah, then you'd most probably get it all on board. But if you had people that were going on holiday and this sort of thing, then you would not get it on. And what would happen is the suitcases would come on a later aircraft. Instead of flying on Concorde, they might have to stick it on board a jumbo jet coming a bit later on. All right, and this is how they would overcome it. If it was a big organisation, like you might say like a pop group or something like that, obviously you'd have to make alternative arrangements to bring a lot of the gear across there. Okay.
So welcome on board. What do you know about this aeroplane?
Not much.
It's very famous because it can travel very, very, very fast. This aeroplane can fly faster than a bullet from a gun, about 3 times faster than a jumbo. You could go to New York and back in a day with these aeroplanes. So you could leave London at 10 in the morning, spend the day in New York and be back in London by 11 at night, all on the same day.
That's amazing.
Aeroplanes don't do that anymore. So this aeroplane is nearly 60 years old. There's no computers on it at all. 3 crew members, 2 pilots, and the man here was the key man, was the flight engineer. He monitored all the technical systems on the aeroplane. The aeroplane could fly routinely at 1,350 miles an hour, 26 miles a minute on the edge of space. It's actually faster than a bullet from a gun. And you could arrive in New York before you left London, so you could go backwards in time as well. So we could leave London at 10 in the morning, and after a 3-hour flight, arrive in New York, where the time difference is 5 hours. You could arrive in New York at 8 o'clock in the morning, which is 2 hours before you left London. That's quite clever. Used to fly so high, you're on the edge of space, and the skin was so hot you could fry an egg on it. And you're flying on the edge of space where it's very, very, very cold. And the result of that is the aeroplane actually stretches in flight by about that much. And then as we slow down and cool down, it shrinks again. Aeroplanes don't do that anymore either. Wow. Isn't that clever? Do you know who flew this aeroplane to New York and back in a day once?
No.
Me.
Oh, well done.
My wife thought I'd gone fishing for the day. I've been to New York and
So did you work for British Airways?
I was an air traffic controller at Heathrow Airport.
I used to work for BA at Heathrow.
Oh, did you?
I did. I
Where
was in
were you?
ops control.
Oh, I used to work in the old tower.
Ah, okay.
And then
I
I
was
went-
in the Compass Centre.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, happy days.
They were. I miss those days.
Yes. We used to do familiarisation flights on this.
Ah, okay.
That's where my claim to fame was. Well, not claim to fame, but I was one of the senior guys at Heathrow, so when we had trainees, we would send them on familiarisation flights. So you get familiar. So we did the 747s and we did the Gatwick-based DC-10s as well. And this. Long time ago.
Yes. Sadly, I do miss those days.
Well, I worked in the old tower, and then I moved over to the Air Traffic Control Centre at West Drayton.
Yeah.
And then at about the year 2000, the Air Traffic Control Centre at West Drayton moved down to Swanwick in Hampshire, so I spent my last few years there before I retired and moved back up north. But the Heathrow radar, approach radar, was actually at Swanwick, despite its name.
I'm just gobsmacked by all the buttons.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Well, most of the buttons you don't need.
Oh.
You only need, I mean, for example, the things up here, these are the fire extinguishers in the engine, so hopefully you wouldn't need those on a routine basis.
Well, hopefully not, no.
All you need to fly any aeroplane are the primary flight instruments, of which there are 4. The airspeed indicator, the artificial horizon, the compass, the altimeter. If you've got those, you can fly any aeroplane. The rest is irrelevant, really. 4 thrust levers for 4 engines, engine control, 3 mechanical inertial navigation systems to navigate the aeroplane. But providing you have the primary flight instrument, then nothing else matters, really. couple of things unique to Concorde, things like this, for example. That's the Mach meter, which tells you how fast you're going relative to the speed of sound. A jumbo cruises at just over 500 miles an hour. This aeroplane, as we know, can cruise at 1,350 miles an hour.
It's over double, isn't it?
Over double, absolutely. This lever here, which people think is the gear lever, isn't. That's the gear lever. This moves the visor up and down, so the whole nose actually hinges down, and that's only to allow the pilots a view of the runway coming into land, or to allow it to taxi out in safety. These 4 white tabs here, these control the afterburner. This is normally a thing you see on military jets, military interceptors, the sort of big sheet of flame out of the back of the engine to provide additional acceleration. This aeroplane employs the same system on all 4 engines. It can accelerate from a standing start to 300 miles an hour in about 90 seconds. Within 90 seconds you'll be passing 3,000 feet. You switch them off. Each engine burns 22 tons of fuel an hour in afterburner. In the case of BA, you would engage it out over the Bristol Channel, 36,000 feet, for about 10 or 12 minutes to accelerate the aeroplane through the speed of sound, and then you switch it off. And you don't need them for the rest of the flight. The aeroplane would just continually accelerate and climb. The only limitation on the speed of the aeroplane is how hot it becomes. And as we've said, it actually stretches and contracts in flight. And a good example is, you see the little blue plaque there that says cabin secured for takeoff? Just by the engineer's panel there.
Yes.
There's a little millimetre gap there between the engineer's panel and the bulkhead. Well, this is quite a famous photograph, which you may have seen before, of the flight engineer with his hand down that gap. And that's one of the expansion joints where the aeroplane stretches in flight.
Wow.
On the very last flight of the Concorde that's now on display in Bristol, the flight engineer who retired with the aeroplane, he put his cap in there. And then the aeroplane shrunk and trapped it, and it's still there today. That's quite remarkable for a 60-year-old aeroplane.
So, lined up on the runway, we've got a British Airways aircraft. There it goes. We've had our visit at the Runway Visitor Park, and we've had our tour of Concorde, which I absolutely loved. And it was really nice to have a chat with someone who was working at Heathrow at the same time as me, so kind of knew the place that I worked at, and that was nice. I enjoyed that. I'm really pleased that we came today. I've really enjoyed it. Did you enjoy it, John?
You know what? It was a really enjoyable way to spend a few hours. I'm glad that we came.
Yeah, it was good. Do you enjoy it, George?
Aww.
Yeah. Anyway, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give us a thumbs up. And if you don't already, please hit the subscribe button, and you'll never miss one of our weekly uploads. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.